When it comes to rendering your scene, 3ds Max provides quite a few different options to choose from. Let's take a look at some of those choices. This is a file named Render Techniques. You can find it in the Working Files folder. The render commands in 3ds Max are located on the far right-hand side of the toolbar. There you'll find 3 icons that have teapots on their faces. Those are your rendering options. You've got Render Production, sometimes referred to as Quick Render. There's the Rendered Frame window, and there's Render Setup. We'll be discussing the far right 2 commands in this video, leaving the 3rd command, Render Setup, for a video a little later on in the chapter that deals with saving a rendered image. Now, when you're simply wanting to render one of your viewports to see how things are coming, the trick is to simply activate that view, then click on the Render Production icon on the toolbar. That's the one on the farthest right. With the camera view being active, let's go ahead and do that. You could also choose to use the Shift-Q keyboard shortcut to activate the command. The viewport you render, unless things have been customized, will always be the one that is active. So if we instead wanted to render a picture of the front view, we'd activate that window, then again hit Render Production, or Shift-Q if using the shortcut. Let's do that. We'll right-click to activate the front view, then render things up. Let's render the camera view again real quick so I can show you another option that you might want to start using. If you find yourself continually changing the view that you're working in, switching back and forth from one to another, but want to continue rendering the very same view you last rendered, irrespective of what view you might have active, you can use the Render Last hotkey. That's F9. Let's try that. Now remember, the last view that we rendered was the camera viewport. Let's right-click to activate the front view, then hit F9 on our keyboard. Notice that even though it was the front view that was active, we rendered the camera view once again. You can see the specific viewport that the picture was taken from up at the very top left corner of the render dialog. Let's activate the top view and again render last using F9. So again, the same thing happens with the camera view being the view that renders. Let's also talk about some of the options that you have in the render window. Now, the official name for the render box that we currently have on the screen is the Rendered Frame window. It's opened by either rendering one of our views or by clicking on the Render Frame window icon on the toolbar. Let's go ahead and close it up real quick, then use the toolbar icon to reopen it. Now, this doesn't re-render the scene, it simply reopens the render window. Okay, let's take a look at some of the options in the window. Up at the top left of the dialog, you have a series of buttons. The far left one is the Save Image command. It looks like an old floppy disk. It serves as a fast and easy way to save a single image render, but it doesn't offer, frankly, very many options, giving you the ability to only determine the location, name, and file type of what you're saving. To the right of that, you have the Copy Image command, which copies the current rendered image to the Windows clipboard, giving you then the opportunity to paste that image into another application, like maybe Photoshop or Microsoft Word. Let's see how that would work if we, for an example, wanted to paste this into a Word document. With Microsoft Word open, I'll use my copy command, Ctrl-V. The Clone command, to the right of Copy Image, gives you the opportunity of cloning your last render, which then, if desired, enables you to compare the way the scene looks from one render to the next. Kind of like a before and after option, working along the lines that this is the way things looked before my changes, and here's the way things look afterwards. If wanting, you can also print directly out of the Max application. Again though, you're frankly not getting very much as far as controllable details in your printing. Then there's the Clear button, enabling you to leave the window open but clearing out the results of your last render. Let's go ahead and click that. Above those controls and a little bit to the right under Viewport, you can quickly change to another render angle without having to activate the view. Let's change the option to Top, then click the Render button on the far right side of the dialog. Let's also render the front view. And we'll take things back to rendering the camera viewport. You can also choose from a series of preset rendering configurations which allow you to quickly make picture-taking changes on the fly. We'll go ahead and leave those set as is. To the right of the preset options, you'll find your primary rendering controls under Render Setup, which is actually the same button that's located on the far left side of the Render Teapot commands on the toolbar. We'll be going into detail on the Render Setup controls in an upcoming video. You also have your Environment and Effects button directly to the right of Render Setup. This gives you control over things like viewport background color, ambient lighting and exposure control, and atmospheric effects. And lastly, what most would say are the most important controls in the render frame window if wanting to customize the actual area of the scene that you render. You've got the Area to Render options on the far top left side. These settings are essentially used to speed up the rendering process, enabling you the option of choosing only certain areas or certain objects when setting out to render. Let's take a look at how these specific features work. We'll start with Render Selected. Now before we render, a couple things we'll need to do. Let's first slide the render window a little farther to the left in the interface. Let's also clear the last render from being displayed in the view. And lastly, back in the camera viewport, let's select the yellow plate. This will be the object that we specifically want to render. Okay, with things set up, back in the rendered window, upper right-hand corner, click on the Render button. As expected, the only thing that shows up in the renderer is the plate. If we now move the plate and render again, as last time, the only thing that renders is what we had selected in our scene. The reason that you currently see two plates is because the only part of the screen that redrew was where the selected object was in the view. Because the Render Selected option doesn't do much to show either shadows or reflections in a scene, you also have an option called Render Region. Let's go ahead and activate that. This brings up a resizable render window that can be sized and positioned to render only specific areas of a scene. The control handles that you see on the side of the box, both in the rendered window and in the viewport, allow you to resize the rendered area. Let's see if we can't both resize and reposition that window, so the only thing that shows up in the render is the plant and the remote control. Grabbing the bounding box in the middle allows you to change its position. Okay, with it now in place, let's click Render again. Now you can do that either on the toolbar or in the rendered frame window. Back in the upper left-hand corner, let's change things back to Render View and we'll render again. There's also a feature that allows you to blow an area up to a larger size for closer inspection without having to manually zoom in to that particular area. The option's called Render Blowup. Let's try that. Again, we get a customizable render window. Let's make that window smaller and we'll reposition it directly on top of the remote. When rendering again, we now have a close-up of the remote control. If we also wanted to take a closer look at the vegetation on the table, we could simply slide the render window around. Rendering again, and there's your plant. Let's go back to the Render View option, Rendering Again. The Area to Render settings also have an option called Crop. This will take a picture only of the area inside the window, reducing the size of the render in doing so. Let's try that, isolating an area only around the green glass. When we render, you can see the results. So that'll give you a few options that you can use next time you render. They can all come in handy, all depending on the job at hand. So take the time to learn them, and be sure to use them when next rendering a project.